Have you ever noticed something strange when you're online? You can use the apps, you understand the trends, you know how everything works, and yet it feels like you're slightly out of rhythm. Not confused, not incapable, just off. Maybe you don't post much. Maybe you hesitate before replying. Maybe you feel weirdly exposed sharing ordinary details of your life. Or maybe you scroll for 10 minutes and feel exhausted in a way that doesn't make sense. If you grew up before the internet became the center of daily life, this feeling isn't random. It's not about intelligence, it's not about being bad with tech, and it's definitely not about being outdated. It's about conditioning, because the environment you grew up in trained your brain differently. Before the internet, information had weight. You waited for it. You searched for it. Sometimes you didn't get it at all. If someone didn't reply, it meant they weren't home. If you were bored, you were just bored. If you embarrassed yourself, maybe 5 people saw it. Life moved in longer loops. Conversations unfolded slowly. Opinions formed over time. Reputation wasn't updated hourly. Your nervous system adapted to that pace. Psychologists call this environmental conditioning. Your brain doesn't just learn skills, it learns timing. It learns how fast feedback usually arrives. It learns how much social exposure is normal. And your baseline matters more than you think. When you grow up in slower feedback systems, your attention learns depth. You can stay with one thing. You can tolerate waiting. You can process privately before speaking publicly. Then the world changes. Suddenly, everything is instant. Replies are expected in minutes. News updates every hour. Opinions form in real time. Everyone's life is visible, searchable, and constantly refreshed. And here's the quiet tension. Your brain was trained for depth. The modern system rewards speed. So when you feel tired after scrolling, it's not because you're weak. It's because your nervous system is processing more signals per minute than it was originally calibrated for. And that's just one layer. There's another one that's harder to see. Before the internet, comparison had boundaries. You compared yourself to classmates, neighbors, co workers. You saw their bad days, their awkward moments, their normal lives. Now comparison has scale. You compare your ordinary Tuesday to someone else's highlight reel from across the planet. Researchers have found that social comparison intensifies when exposure widens without context. When we see outcomes without seeing process, our brain fills in the blanks and usually assumes we're behind. You don't consciously think, everyone is better than me. It's subtler than that. It's the small tightening in your chest. The tiny question, am I doing enough? The quiet sense that everyone else seems more visible, more active, more optimized. And if you grew up without constant visibility, there's an extra friction. Because being a person used to be separate from being observed. You could have opinions that weren't archived. You could change your mind without screenshots. You could exist without documenting yourself. Now, existing often feels like performing, even if no one asked you to. And that can create something very specific. Not fear, not resistance, but hesitation. You pause before posting. You overthink wording. You replay interactions in your head. Not because you're insecure, because your brain learned that identity was private first and public second. So when the world flipped that order, something inside you didn't fully recalibrate. And then there's the constant contact layer. When communication wasn't instant, silence meant neutrality. Now, silence can feel loaded. If someone messages you and you don't respond, your body reacts like you're breaking a small social contract, even if no one said that contract exists. Your phone vibrates. You feel a tiny spike. You tell yourself, I'll answer later. But a part of your brain stays slightly on alert. Not dramatic, just humming in the background. Studies on attention and digital interruption suggest that even anticipating a message can fragment focus. It's not just the notification, it's the expectation of availability. And if you didn't grow up in a world where you were reachable 24/7, that expectation doesn't feel neutral. It feels like pressure. So now we have the full picture of the tension. You were trained in an environment that rewarded patience, privacy, and slower feedback loops. You're now living in an environment that rewards visibility, speed, and constant responsiveness. And somewhere in between, you might be telling yourself a quiet story. Maybe I'm just not adapting well. But what if this isn't about adaptation at all? What if it's about calibration? Because your brain didn't fail to modernize, it optimized for a different world. And the real question isn't whether you can keep up. It's what happens when a nervous system trained for depth tries to survive in a system built for velocity. The first shift is this: stop treating speed as a virtue. For a long time, you probably absorbed the idea that being fast equals being competent. Fast replies, fast decisions, fast adaptation. If you hesitate, you're behind. If you take your time, you're inefficient. But your brain doesn't measure worth in speed. It measures safety and clarity. When you grew up in longer feedback loops, your nervous system learned to think before speaking, to observe before reacting, to finish one thing before jumping to the next. That's not a flaw, that's a wiring pattern. So instead of forcing yourself to match the internet's tempo all day, try a 2-speed rule. Divide your day intentionally. Have one protected block where you operate at your natural depth pace. No notifications, no rapid switching, one task, one thread, one conversation at a time, and then have a separate window where you allow speed, replies, updates, quick scans. You're not rejecting the modern world. You're structuring it. When you do this consistently, something subtle happens. Your brain stops feeling like it's constantly behind, because you're no longer trying to run one operating system in 2 conflicting modes at the same time. The second shift is about availability pressure. If you grew up before constant connectivity, your brain still interprets silence differently. You don't naturally assume that delayed replies are normal. So when you delay responding, your body can register it as social risk. Instead of trying to be less sensitive, change the contract. Use simple expectation setting sentences. I usually reply in the evenings. I'm offline during work hours. If it's urgent, call. That's it. Calm, neutral, no apology. When expectations are spoken, your nervous system relaxes because ambiguity shrinks. You're not secretly violating a rule anymore. You've defined the rule. And here's the part most people miss. You don't need everyone to agree with your pace. You need your body to trust it. Now let's talk about comparison. When you grew up offline, you saw the full arc of people's lives, struggles included. Now you mostly see outcomes, promotions, trips, milestones, opinions delivered confidently. Your brain fills in the invisible parts with fantasy competence. So here's a practical reset habit. Anytime you feel that subtle, I'm behind sensation, add one silent sentence. I'm seeing an outcome, not the process. That one line reintroduces context. You're not denying their success. You're correcting your brain's shortcut. Over time, this reduces the emotional spike. Not because you stop comparing, but because you stop believing incomplete data. And then there's identity friction. If you were formed in a world where your private self came first, you might still feel strange packaging your life into something shareable. That doesn't mean you're bad at branding. It means you value internal coherence. So instead of asking, how do I present myself better? Try asking, what parts of me actually want to be visible? You don't owe the internet your full personality. Experiment with selective visibility. Share one idea without polishing it. Post one photo without over-curating it. Leave one message slightly imperfect. This is a small exposure exercise. You're teaching your nervous system that visibility doesn't equal danger. And importantly, you're doing it on your terms. What starts to shift is identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone who didn't grow up digital and is now catching up. You start seeing yourself as someone who carries depth into fast environments. That's different. Speed without depth becomes noise. Depth without speed can become isolation. But depth with intentional speed, that's integration. And here's the identity reframe that matters. You're not outdated, you're cross-trained. Your brain learned patience before immediacy, privacy before performance, conversation before broadcast. That doesn't make you slower. It gives you range. The goal isn't to become native to constant velocity. The goal is to consciously choose when to accelerate and when to stay grounded. When you design your pace, set expectations clearly, reset comparison with context, and practice selective visibility, you stop fighting the environment. You start navigating it. And if this resonates, you're not alone in that in-between space. A lot of people who grew up before the internet quietly feel this tension but assume it's just them. If that's you, I'd love to hear what part hits hardest. Pace, comparison, or visibility. Drop it in the comments. And if you want more psychology that makes everyday reactions make sense, subscribe. That's what this channel is here for. You're not broken, you're adapting with awareness.